it's Lori. I'm here today with a list of recommendations for audiobooks. Now, we are at the end-ish of May now, middle to end of May, and summer is coming soon. You can't really tell by outside my window because it's raining really hard today. But with summer comes a lot of travel, and because we live rurally, we do a lot of driving. So I thought I'd break these up by length of trip. So we're going to start off with some great audiobooks to listen to that are appropriate to listen to with kids, that are 4 hours or less, and then another group that are in the 4 to 8 hour range. Then we'll move into the 8+ range, and then finally I'm going to end up with things I recommend if you do a lot of like traveling back and forth. So these are things that take a long time to wrap up, or series that you might enjoy in the car. I really appreciate all the narrations of all of the books I'm going to list and the stories. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, the shortest audiobook that I'm going to talk about is called Missing May, and this is by Cynthia Rylant, and the narrator is Frances McDormand. This one's 1 hour and 58 minutes long. It's been a while since we've listened to this one, but basically the story of Missing May is about a young girl who ends up going with her aunt and uncle and living with them because of circumstances in her life. And then her aunt, May, passes away, and she and her uncle are kind of left to figure out how to carry on. So it's a sweet, short story. And the narrator, I don't know if the narrator naturally has an accent, but the accent used in the audiobook seems to fit well with it, so I appreciated that about it. The next audiobook I'd like to talk about is The Invention of Hugo Cabret. This is by Brian Selznick, and the narrator for this one was Jeff Woodman. This one's 2 hours and 51 minutes long. Now, this book, I actually saw the movie before I knew there was a book. So if you've seen the movie Hugo, that was based upon this book. And what's unique about this audiobook is it's not really a traditional audiobook. There are like sound effects, so you start off and you'll hear like train whistles and people walking around and things like that. So it has a lot more sound effects than the average audiobook, but it's just a phenomenal story about Hugo, a boy who finds a drawing, and this kind of changes his whole life. So if you've seen the movie Hugo, same basic idea. Of course, the book does have quite a few differences from the movie. I think both the book and the movie are great in this case. Next up is The Willoughbys by Lois Lowry, and the narrator for this one is Art Johnson, and this one's 2 hours and 56 minutes long. Now, this one is the story of a family with a nanny. So think like Mary Poppins, but think like unhappy family kind of situation, and not really a Mary Poppins, but there's kind of a cranky nanny, and there's these 4 children. And it's a very, very funny story. Some people may have problems with this one if you are very concerned with your kids picking up perhaps bad habits from books. This might not be a great one, but my family just found this one hilarious. I believe this one even has a glossary in the back, and that seems really silly to mention in an audiobook, but it was so well done that we listened to the glossary at the end of the book. So The Willoughbys was very funny, and a great kind of shorter audiobook for those car trips. Next, we have The Tale of Despereaux by Kate DiCamillo, and this one was narrated by Graham Moline. I'm not sure how to pronounce the narrator's name, but this one's 3 hours and 30 minutes. And Tale of Despereaux is a story of this tiny mouse who's not taken very seriously by the other mouse, and so he goes off to become a hero. I think most people are familiar with Tale of Despereaux. This is another one where I think the audiobook is very well done and a lot of fun. Next up, we have Tuck Everlasting. This is by Natalie Babbitt, and the narrator is Peter Thomas. This one's 3 hours and 31 minutes. And Tuck Everlasting is the story. This is another one that pretty much I think everybody knows about. It's the story of a girl who meets a family, and the family has kind of the gift or curse of immortality. They will live forever, and so it's a story of her interactions with this family, and she has to make a decision about whether to become immortal and kind of stay with them or not. So this is a very sweet book. The narration was really good on this one. I really honestly didn't know much about it. I mean, I knew the name, but I didn't know anything about the story going into it. And it was just a very fun book that I listened to in the car with several kids. We even had an exchange student on the trip where we listened to that one. The final shorter audiobook I'd like to talk about is Secrets at Sea. This is by Richard Peck, and the narrator is Jane Entwistle. This one's 3 hours and 44 minutes. So basically, it's the story of a family of mice, a sister and her siblings, that live with a human family, and their mouse and human families have been interrelated for generations. The human family decides to go to England. I believe it's to maybe find a husband for their not very attractive daughter. I can't remember for sure. But the mouse family goes too. And so it's kind of on a cruise ship, like a ship, transatlantic. It's a transatlantic ship. And the mice find that there's a whole kind of staff of mice on the ship as well. So anyway, it's a tale of family and it's a tale of mice, and it's hilarious. And it has one of those narrations where there's one, the voices of the characters are so different and so hilarious that there's one particular character that every time he came in, he said kind of the same thing. And so whenever I hear anything similar to that, it reminds me of this book. So it's a very cute little book. Very enjoyable, and just under 4 hours. So next we're going to move on to kind of the mid-range books. So these are between 4 and 8 hours long. First we have The Castle Corona by Sharon Creech, narrated by Jennifer Wiltsey. And this one is 4 hours and 43 minutes long. Now, this is one of the books that I haven't listened to in the longest amount of time, but I still have really fond memories of listening to this book. It's not a mind-boggling plot or anything, but I just remember the audiobook being very well done and it being very enjoyable, particularly with small children. At the time we listened to this, I'm going to guess the girls might have been 5 and 8, maybe, but this one is about a royal family, and there's also a pair of peasants, and then there's a thief, and there's a lot of kind of funny, humorous things in it. Sharon Creech is kind of an interesting author, so her kind of personality shines through a bit in the book. But so we just kind of see the intersection between this royal family and these peasants and so forth. And see what comes out of it. So another cute book. Next up is one I would recommend for a little bit older, and that is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Now, the kids haven't actually listened to this one with me. I listened to the audiobook last year. I just had a couple days where I had to drive all over the place by myself. I'm not really sure why. But this is, I could listen to Neil Gaiman read a phone book, and he's the narrator of this. Like, such a good narrating voice. One of my absolute favorites. But basically, it's a story of a young man coming back home. I believe he's coming back for a funeral. And he starts to remember his childhood. And so you kind of have the story of his childhood. And then he has these neighbors, and the neighbors are still there, but there's something special about the neighbors. Anyway, so this one gets a little dark and creepy, But I would say that teens and tweens would probably be fine unless they're super sensitive to a little creepiness. So, The Ocean at the End of the Lane, I recommend because it's fabulous. It is, can't find it, 5 hours and 48 minutes long. But just use caution that this one may not be appropriate for younger children. Another fun one is As You Wish, which is, I can't remember the subtitle, but it's about the making of the movie The Princess Bride. And it's by Carrie Ells and a lot of the cast, and they narrate it. So, like, I think Carrie Ells wrote the book, if I remember correctly, but a lot of people came in to narrate kind of their interview sections or whatever. So, it's just very funny, and if you are a fan of the movie The Princess Bride, this is a wonderful audiobook, really well done. Finally, we have Travels with Charlie. This is by John Steinbeck, and the narrator is Gary Sinise, and I wasn't really sure how I'd feel about him as a narrator, but he was great. This one is 7 hours and 58 minutes. And this is the story of, like, it's kind of a memoir type thing. I don't know how to classify it. John Steinbeck decided to take a trip across America, and he brought along his dog, Charlie. So, I remember first reading this book when I was young at my grandparents' house, and to be honest, it's the only Steinbeck book I've ever really appreciated. I should read more Steinbeck. But it's just so charming. He interacts with so many different people, and he's trying to find out more about America, and he's just traveling all over the place. And there's just such a lightness and cheerfulness that's added in by Charlie, his dog. So people are sometimes more willing to talk to him because of his dog, or whatever the case may be. And then Charlie has some issues throughout the trip, so there's a few kind of tearjerker moments when he needs to find emergency vets and so forth. So I really enjoy the story Travels with Charlie, and I thought it was a really good audiobook and would be a great one for a longer road trip. Okay, now we're moving into those 8+ hour audiobooks. So these are great for those major road trips, or maybe to split over a couple smaller road trips. The first one is Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. This is also narrated by Cy Montgomery and is 9 hours and 10 minutes long. This is kind of a natural history / memoir. Cy Montgomery is kind of a naturalist in a sense, and she writes a lot of books. Another one of hers that I have read is The Good Good Pig. But they're fun kind of nature memoirs. So she became interested in octopuses, and she ends up going to a variety of different aquariums and kind of getting to know personally some different octopuses over the course of the journey. And she learns to scuba dive in order to visit the ocean and try to see an octopus in its natural habitat. And that was kind of a fun portion of the book for me, because Eva and I are both certified scuba divers, and Charlotte tried, but she had problems clearing her ears. And Cy Montgomery, I believe, had trouble with her ears as well in her training. So, but she becomes very attached to these octopuses, but it has so many interesting facts, and you learn so much about the octopus, and it's just a very companionable book. This is one that the girls haven't listened to with me. I think I listened to this when I was driving them. We had a family funeral a few years ago when they were visiting my parents, and it's a 4-hour drive, so I had to drive them back and forth a couple times extra so that they could be home for the funeral. So once you have a couple of 4-hour drives by yourself, you pretty much have this book done. Next up is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien, and this is narrated by Rob Inglis. and is 11 hours and 5 minutes long. Rob Inglis does such a great job on these books. So I'm putting The Hobbit here. We're going to talk about the rest of the Lord of the Rings in a little bit. But The Hobbit, of course, is the classic story of Bilbo Baggins. And he is kind of roped into being the thief for an expedition with a bunch of dwarves by Gandalf the wizard. So it's the whole story. It's funny. It's amazing. And, you know, in this book, he finds this ring that later goes on to be a much bigger deal. But The Hobbit is a little bit more of a children's book. So it's a great starter for if you haven't read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, or if it's been a long time, or you want to introduce your kids. The Hobbit's pretty friendly to most ages. We have Watership Down. This is by Richard Adams, and it is narrated by Ralph Cosham. This one is 15 hours and 53 minutes long, and it is a very classic tale. So it's a story of a group of rabbits in the Downs of England, and kind of industrialization is moving in, and so some of these rabbits are going to find a new place, and so there is much that happens to them as they try to find a new home. It's an epic tale of rabbits, but it's a very good story, and this audiobook is very well done. And the last of the longer audiobooks before we get into super long / series is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. The narrator we had was Simon Preble, and this one is 18 hours and 32 minutes long. So this is the story of Pip. Pip is being raised kind of by his sister and her husband, I believe, and the outlook for him is not very good. He's probably going to end up behind the forge, kind of having a rough life, but something happens where he gets this benefactor who is going to make him a gentleman. And so it's kind of the story of Pip as he goes through life and tries to become higher up in kind of society. So there's a lot of very interesting characters in this story. So we've got Miss Havisham, who's was a jilted bride and is like still wearing her wedding dress 50 years later or whatever. Just lots of great kind of side characters as well. So now moving on into longer series or collections that'll keep you busy for a long time in the car. I'm going to go from kind of smallest of these to largest of these. So the smallest is going to be The Lord of the Rings. So we have The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, all by J.R.R. Tolkien, all narrated by Rob Inglis. And if you listen to all three of them, it is 54 hours and 16 minutes long. But if you have ever had problems reading The Lord of the Rings because of the Elvish or the length or the slowness or whatever, this is a great way to get started, because the audiobooks are so well done, so easy to follow, and just fun to listen to. They are a joy. They are just excellently done. So if your kids are kind of old enough for The Lord of the Rings, I mean, probably this is not going to be for your 3 to 7 year olds, but for your 10 to adult, this one's going to be great. So this will keep you busy for quite a while. So obviously it's a story of the ring that Bilbo had found. Turns out to be a ring of power and is wanted by, you know, kind of the most evil being. And so they have to go destroy the ring. And it takes 3 books, 54 hours and 16 minutes to do so. But such good narration. Next up is one that we are still currently working through. This is the All Creatures Great and Small series, written by James Herriot and narrated by Christopher Timothy. Now, the books are All Creatures Great and Small, All Things Bright and Beautiful, All Things Wise and Wonderful, and we are in that one. I think we have about 6 hours left in that one. And The Lord God Made Them All. So there's 4 books. We're more than halfway through book 3, and the total time for all 4 of them is 55 hours and 50 minutes. So another great one for keeping you busy when you're driving around. We've done this one on our way back and forth to co-op for a lot of the year. Basically, these are a memoir about James Herriot's experience being a veterinary surgeon. These are set during the war era, and there are a lot of changes in veterinary medicine that are happening, but they are just so much fun to listen to. There are just some hilarious characters. If you have animal lovers, they're going to love the animals. If you like kind of characters, there's plenty of characters, kind of crazy people who show up in these. And they just paint such a vivid picture of rural life in England at this point in time. So I really do recommend those as well. Next up, we're going to talk about the complete Sherlock Holmes audio collection. There are a couple different ones available. And of course, Sherlock Holmes stories are by Arthur Conan Doyle. But the narrator we enjoy is Simon Vance. I can't remember what there's another one that's also really good. It came down to, I listened to both samples and I picked because I am the pickiest about narrators in our family. So this has all of the Sherlock Holmes stories all in one. So the books and the short stories and everything all together. And it is 58 hours and 4 minutes long. So this will keep you busy for quite a while. So of course, Sherlock Holmes is a detective, and he has a partner, Watson, and Watson's kind of like his foil or something, you know. He's always the one that's like, how did you ever figure it out? But they're just charming stories. They're so much fun. I didn't always get the right answer ahead of time or anything, but they're just such unique stories and such classics. Now, this is another one where I would say watch the age range of your children if you're going to do Sherlock Holmes, because of course there are things like drug use. So if those are topics you don't yet want to discuss with your kids, you might put this off a little while longer. But, you know, we listened to them when our kids were, 10 and up, and it really wasn't a problem. We just talked about when the drug use sorts of things came up. And of course there's murders and stuff like that. So, just be wary of age appropriateness. I would say 10 and up has not been a problem for our family. You can decide for your family whether that's a good fit for your kids at whatever age they are. But the complete Sherlock Holmes collection is another great audiobook for car trips. Last one I'd like to talk about is the Harry Potter series. So the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling is the version we have up there, is narrated by Jim Dale. I've also heard good things about the version narrated by Stephen Fry. I don't have that one. But the Harry Potter series, if you listen to all 7 books, will take you 118 hours and 57 minutes. Jim Dale is just such a marvelous narrator, and J.K. Rowling is just such a fun storyteller that the combination is really good because, J.K. Rowling is a little cartoonish in her writing style, so all the descriptions are kind of extra exaggerated. And then Jim Dale just does such a fabulous job at voicing all the characters. I've listened to these innumerable times. We had them on cassette tape for a long time. The cassette tape started to break, and we bought them on CD, and we've had the CDs for a long time now. One of these days I'm just going to have to break down and get them on Audible too, because I know eventually I'm going to wear out the CDs, because I already wore out a set of cassette tapes. So I don't even want to think about how many hours of my life I have listened to Harry Potter at this point. So that is the end of my recommendations for audiobooks for your road trips. If you have some great recommendations for me, please let me know, because I'm always looking for new ones, particularly new audiobooks appropriate for older kids that are shorter, because during the summer we do a lot of swim meets. And so swim meet days, it'll be an hour and a half to 6 hours of driving. So I could use some recommendations. So if you have some for me, please leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like, and I'd love to have you subscribe and come back. I do love talking about audiobooks, and I do plan to do more videos on audiobooks in the future. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.